In 1892, a broke prospector named Edward Doheny was walking through downtown Los Angeles when he noticed a black tarry substance on the wheels of a passing wagon. He asked the teamster what it was, and was told it was brea, Spanish for tar, and that it came from the West Lake Park District and would be burnt for fuel at a nearby ice plant. Doheny had spent years working mines across the American West, and he knew what a surface seep meant. So he borrowed $400 from his old partner, Charles Canfield, leased a tar pit just south of Echo Park, and the two men began to dig. On April the 20th, 1892, they struck oil. What followed was one of the most disruptive land rushes in American urban history, one that would leave the city of Los Angeles with a problem that it still hasn't really fully solved. Nobody wanted to live inside an oil field. All the same, the city grew up around the rigs. The rigs stayed in the ground, and eventually, the only solution that anyone could agree on was to disguise the oil rigs as fake buildings, with the hope that no one would ask too many questions. Some of those buildings are standing to this very day on some of the most recognizable streets in the world. So how did LA end up with fake buildings like a synagogue, a derrick disguised as a dragon, and an oil well pumping beneath a shopping mall? Stay tuned to find out as we uncover the story of LA's fake buildings. I'm your host, Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. Let's start with how quickly everything got out of hand. Within 4 years of Doheny's strike, the Los Angeles City oil field held 500 active wells. By 1895, that single field was producing more than half of all the oil in the state of California. At its peak in 1901, approximately 200 separate well companies were operating within it. The derricks went up in clusters, and then what resembled forest, across land that was simultaneously being divided into residential lots and commercial corridors. So early on, there was no meaningful separation between where the people of LA lived and where the oil was being extracted. They occupied the same ground, in fact, and the ground, well, it kept giving. Fast forward to June the 23rd, 1921, when a well on a hilltop south of the city erupted. Apparently, the column of oil reached 114 feet into the air. That moment alone launched the Long Beach field overnight. And with that, Signal Hill had so many derricks erected so quickly that people started calling it Porcupine Hill. In 1930, California was producing nearly a quarter of the entire world's oil output, and Los Angeles had grown from just 50,000 residents in the 1890s to more than 1 million. So in that context, the population and the oil industry had grown into each other at the same pace, which meant that by the mid-century, when the city was starting to think about the kind of place that it wanted to be, oil rigs were already everywhere. Places like Beverly Hills, Venice, and Huntington Beach had all been built directly atop former oil fields. The oil companies had legal rights to what was underneath, and they were not interested in walking away. So when the city began trying to look like the global cultural capital that it was becoming, it had a significant problem to solve. I mean, think about it. What was the city to do? Extraction equipment was sitting right in the middle of the most desirable neighborhoods. After much debate, the answer came in the form of architecture. Built in 1966, the Cardiff Tower on West Pico Boulevard is often described as the first architecturally designed oil derrick in LA, though the owners went beyond just designing it to blend in with the neighborhood. You see, that area had been a Jewish enclave since the end of World War II, so the company designed the facade to look like a synagogue, whereas inside, a movable derrick on a track system taps 40 active wells, rebuilt in 2001 to keep pace with production. From the street, it reads as a place of worship, yet it's not. Just 2 years later, half-mile west, a second structure went up that made Cardiff look modest. The Packard Well site on West Pico, presented to the neighborhood as an ordinary office building, is windowless, 6 stories tall, with a manicured lawn and a lobby inside. Though the looks are deceiving. The reality is that on the inside, a derrick on tracks moved between 52 active oil and gas wells. under a building that has no roof. When it opened in 1968, the company briefly opened the lobby to the public, complete with an educational display about the petroleum industry and a window to watch the pumps in action. So, although you could opt to go inside of the structure and learn how the oil industry worked, most people really had no idea what was happening inside. And it should be noted here that the open door arrangement eventually ended. Not far away, Beverly Hills High School had been sitting above the Beverly Hills oil field since before the school itself was built in 1927. At one point, the campus held nearly 20 individual wells, with the last one standing, taking a rather different approach to the disguise. In 2000, the 165-foot derrick at the edge of the campus was wrapped in vinyl panels painted with flowers by children from the local hospitals. The structure was then renamed the Tower of Hope and became a visible, but rather strange fixture on the school grounds. Think about that. For years, students walked past the structure every single day and had no idea that inside was an oil well. With that in mind, this pattern of disguising oil wells was held across the city, though not every disguise was architectural. For example, a children's amusement park called Beverly Park had operated since 1943 on land leased from the Beverly Oil Company. And when new owners took over the park, they found that one of the derricks were disguised as a dragon with flapping wings. Again, this is an interesting contrast. Oil was being welled, and yet the park ran rides, hosted birthday parties, and reportedly, by some accounts, inspired a young Walt Disney. Though it wouldn't last forever. In 1974, Beverly Oil told the operator that they were going to raise the rent and planned to drill additional wells on the property. So the park was closed, and in its place came the Beverly Center Mall, built on the same site in 1982. As of 2020, the western portion of that mall still contains 45 active wells and 16 idle ones. And it's not the only example of its type. There's also the Rancho Park Golf Course and the Hillcrest Country Club, a few miles west, which drew from the same oil fields and had its equipment hiding in fairways, perfectly invisible from any public road. Companies had been drilling Rancho Park since 1958 under a lease agreement with the city of LA, yet golfers were out there playing the course. In fact, the LA Open was held there 18 times. Now, in University Park, a few blocks from USC, the approach was similar and ultimately the most consequential. The drill site sits on 23rd Street behind a vine-covered wall and a manicured lawn. There are no fake facades here, though in this case, the wells were just concealed by greenery and the presumption that the neighbors wouldn't notice. However, after the company boosted production by 400% in 2010, using a process called acidizing, residents began reporting nosebleeds, chronic headaches, and asthma attacks, including attacks in individuals who were not known to have asthma before. And although these effects were quite dramatic, it would take years before the state finally sealed all 21 wells in February of 2026. These fake buildings were not meant to stand forever. The Tower of Hope at Beverly Hills eventually came down quietly. By the time the operating company filed for bankruptcy in 2017, production had already dropped by 90% from its earlier 1980s peak of 850,000 barrels a year. As for the school district, well, it was left with an $8 million bill to plug the wells with cement and dismantle the site. As for the more harmful sites, well, a legal reckoning arrived in 2022 when the governor signed Senate Bill 1137, establishing a 3,200-foot buffer between new oil and gas wells and sensitive sites, including homes, schools, and hospitals. The industry spent tens of millions of dollars trying to repeal it through a ballot referendum. Even so, in June of 2024, the industry dropped that referendum, and the law went into effect. Even so, most of these fake buildings won't be going anywhere anytime soon. SB 1137 grandfathers existing sites. It prevents new permits from being issued in the same proximity to homes and schools, but it does not disable those that exist. What that means, in practice, is that the era of solving the problem with a coat of architectural paint is formally closed, but the buildings that it produced are not going anywhere. Los Angeles built itself on oil and then spent 60 years making that oil invisible. It dressed the derricks as synagogues, office buildings, flower-covered towers, and dragons, and these disguises worked well enough that most people who drove past them on a daily basis never really gave the topic a second thought. So that's the story of why LA is filled with fake buildings. I really hope you liked it, and will hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Otherwise, as always, this is Ryan Socash, signing off.